The blood from Hannah Zimmer's split lip tasted like copper and shame as she stumbled into Rock Springs, Wyoming on a dusty afternoon in July 1882, carrying everything she owned in a flour sack. She had walked 20 miles from the neighboring settlement, where her stepfather had finally made good on his threat to throw her out, telling her that no man would ever want a homely girl with a sharp tongue and calloused hands anyway. Hannah had believed him because nobody had ever told her different, and at 22 years old, she figured the truth of her plainness was as fixed as the mountains on the horizon. Rock Springs sprawled before her like a promise she was afraid to trust, all weathered wood buildings and red dust, with the smell of coal smoke hanging thick in the air from the nearby mines. She needed work, and she needed it fast, before the few coins in her pocket ran out and left her sleeping under the stars with nothing but rattlesnakes for company. The first place she tried was the general store, where the owner looked her up and down with narrowed eyes and said they had no use for a girl who looked like she had been dragged behind a horse. The second place was the boarding house, where the proprietor took one look at her bruised face and threadbare dress and shut the door without a word. Hannah was starting to think her stepfather had been right about everything when she noticed the small restaurant at the end of the main street, a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Copper Kettle." Her stomach was growling something fierce, and her feet ached in boots that had worn through at the heels. But she pushed open the door anyway, and found herself in a warm space that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and flour on her apron looked up from behind the counter. "We are closed between lunch and dinner," the woman said, but her voice was not unkind. "I am looking for work, not food," Hannah said, though both would have been welcome. "I can cook and clean, and I do not steal or complain." The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in the bruises and the desperate set of Hannah's shoulders. "Can you be here before dawn to get the ovens going?" "Yes, madam." "Can you handle men who have been drinking and think a woman alone is an invitation?" "I have handled worse," Hannah said, and the truth of it must have shown in her eyes because the woman nodded. "I am Mrs. Patricia Dalton. You can start tomorrow morning. There is a room in the back, small but clean. It comes with the job." Hannah felt something crack open in her chest, something that might have been hope if she had remembered what that felt like. "Thank you." She started the next morning while the stars were still bright overhead, stoking the fire and mixing dough until her arms burned. Mrs. Dalton was a fair boss who did not ask questions about the bruises that were fading to yellow-green on Hannah's face, and the work was hard but honest. The restaurant served miners and ranch hands and the occasional family passing through, and Hannah learned to keep her head down and her hands busy. She had been there almost a week when he walked in. Dalton Cole was tall and lean with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of sage in summer. He wore dusty jeans and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he moved that made Hannah think of a wolf, all easy grace and latent power. He took a seat at the counter and smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in her stomach that she quickly pushed down. "Coffee, please," he said. "And whatever Mrs. Dalton is cooking today." Hannah poured the coffee with steady hands even though her heart was hammering. "Beef stew and cornbread. Sounds perfect." She brought him his food and tried not to notice the way his hands looked strong and capable, or the way he thanked her like she was a person worth thanking. He came back the next day and the day after that, always polite, always patient, and always looking at her like she was someone worth looking at. On the fourth day, he said something that made the world tilt sideways. "You have beautiful eyes," he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. the color of wildflower honey. Hannah nearly dropped the coffee pot. She looked around to see who he was talking to, but there was nobody else nearby. Me. Yes, you. He smiled again, that easy smile that made her feel off balance. Has nobody ever told you that? No. The word came out sharp, defensive. She hurried back to the kitchen before he could say anything else, her cheeks burning and her hands shaking. Beautiful. The word felt like a trick, like something designed to make her lower her guard so he could laugh at her later. Men did not say things like that to girls like her. But Dalton Cole came back the next day and the day after that, and each time he found something new to compliment. Your hair catches the light from the window real pretty. You have a lovely smile, though you do not use it near enough. The way you move is graceful, like you are dancing even when you are just walking. Hannah did not know what to do with his words. She deflected them, ignored them, tried to build walls against them, but Dalton was patient and persistent. He was a cowboy who worked at the Red Creek Ranch about 10 miles outside of town, he told her one day. He came to Rock Springs once a week for supplies, and had been eating at the Copper Kettle for years because Mrs. Dalton made the best cornbread in Wyoming. Why do you say those things? Hannah finally asked him after 2 weeks of his steady compliments. They were the only ones in the restaurant during the quiet hour between lunch and dinner, and she had run out of ways to avoid the question. What things? Dalton asked, though she could see in his eyes that he knew exactly what she meant. That I am beautiful, that I am graceful, all of it. Because it is true. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. It is not true, I know what I look like. Hannah felt something hot and angry rising in her throat. I have mirrors, I have eyes. And I have had people telling me my whole life that I am plain and homely and not worth a second glance. Dalton set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his eyes serious. Then those people were blind or cruel or both. You want to know what I see when I look at you? No, Hannah said, but she did not move away. I see a woman who is stronger than she knows. I see eyes that are warm and golden and full of thoughts you keep locked up tight. I see hands that work hard and do not complain. I see a face with good bones and a mouth that looks like it was made for smiling, even if you have forgotten how. And yes, I see beauty. Real beauty, the kind that does not wash off or fade. Hannah felt tears prickling at the back of her eyes, and she hated herself for it. You do not know anything about me. Then tell me. Let me know you. She almost said no. She almost walked away and built her walls higher and thicker until nothing could get through. But there was something in the way Dalton looked at her, something steady and honest and patient, that made her want to try. So she told him about growing up with a mother who died when she was 10 and a stepfather who saw her as nothing but an extra mouth to feed. She told him about working from dawn until dark and never being good enough, pretty enough, quiet enough, useful enough. She told him about the day her stepfather had hit her hard enough to split her lip and told her to get out and never come back. Dalton listened to all of it without interrupting, and when she was done, his jaw was tight and his eyes were hard. He had no right to treat you like that. Nobody does. It does not matter now. I am here and he is there, and that is the end of it. It matters, Dalton said firmly. And for what it is worth, I am glad you ended up in Rock Springs. Real glad. After that day, something shifted between them. Dalton still came to the restaurant several times a week, but now they talked, really talked. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Colorado and learning to rope and ride before he could raid. He told her about losing his parents to influenza when he was 19 and drifting for a few years, before landing at the Red Creek Ranch, where the owner had given him a chance and a purpose. He told her about his dreams of saving enough money to buy his own piece of land someday, something small but his own. Hannah found herself looking forward to his visits, found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the wooden floor and the low rumble of his voice. She started to notice things about him, like the way he always hung his hat on the same peg by the door, and the way he took his coffee black with one sugar, and the way his hands were scarred from years of hard work, but still somehow gentle, and he kept telling her she was beautiful. Every single day he came in, he found something new to praise. The way her hair looked when she pinned it up, the sound of her laugh when he finally coaxed one out of her, the strength in her arms when she carried heavy trays, the intelligence in her eyes when they talked about books or current events or anything that mattered. At first, Hannah flinched away from every compliment like it was a blow. She deflected and argued and tried to prove him wrong. But Dalton never wavered, never got frustrated, never gave up. He just kept saying it, steady and sure, until the words started to wear down her defenses like water on stone. One day in late August, nearly 2 months after she had arrived in Rock Springs, Hannah caught sight of herself in the small mirror in her room and paused. She looked at her face, really looked at it, and tried to see what Dalton saw. Her eyes were golden brown, she supposed, and they were not small or mean-looking. Her hair was thick and wavy, even if it was a mousy brown color. Her face was thin, but maybe that just meant her cheekbones were visible. Her mouth was wide, but maybe that was not such a bad thing. She was not a beauty like the women in the fashion magazines that sometimes came through the general store. But maybe, just maybe, she was not as plain as she had always believed. Maybe the problem had never been her face at all, but the voices that had told her it was not enough. That evening, when Dalton came in for dinner, Hannah smiled at him without prompting. It was a real smile, not the polite one she gave customers, and she saw the way his whole face lit up in response. "There it is," he said softly. "That beautiful smile." "Thank you," Hannah said, and this time she did not argue or deflect. She just accepted the compliment and let it settle somewhere warm in her chest. Dalton's eyes widened slightly, and then his smile grew even bigger. "You are welcome." After that, things moved faster. Dalton started coming to town more often, sometimes bringing her wildflowers he had picked on the range or a book he thought she might enjoy. Hannah started to let herself hope, started to imagine a future that looked different from the bleak one she had always assumed was waiting for her. They went for walks on her day off, strolling down by the creek that ran just outside of town and talking until the sun set and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. One evening in early September, Dalton took her hand as they walked. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, and Hannah felt a thrill run through her at the simple contact. They had never touched beyond the accidental brush of fingers when she handed him his coffee, and this felt momentous, like crossing a threshold. "Is this all right?" Dalton asked, always careful of her comfort. "Yes," Hannah said, and meant it. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their hands linked, and Hannah felt something she had never felt before. Safe, cherished, seen. When they reached the big cottonwood tree that marked the edge of town, Dalton stopped and turned to face her. "Hannah, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped into her throat. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I already have fallen. I know it has not been that long, and I know you have reasons to be cautious, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." His eyes were steady on hers. No games or tricks, just honesty. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and it would be the greatest honor of my life if you would let me court you proper." Hannah felt tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Why me? Why would you want me?" Dalton reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Because you are brave and strong and kind. Because you make me laugh and you make me think. Because when I am with you, Everything feels right in a way it never has before. And because you are beautiful inside and out, even if you are still learning to believe it. I am starting to believe it, Hannah whispered. When you say it, I am starting to believe it. Then I will keep saying it every day for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes. Hannah kissed him then, rising up on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It was her first real kiss, sweet and tentative and full of promise. Dalton wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was something precious, and Hannah let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was. They courted properly after that, with Dalton making his intentions clear to Mrs. Dalton and anyone else who cared to know. He took Hannah to the church social and introduced her to his friends from the ranch. He brought her to meet his boss, a gruff man named Samuel who shook Hannah's hand and said Dalton had been walking around like a fool with a permanent smile lately, and it was clearly her doing. Hannah met the other ranch hands and the families that lived nearby, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Dalton kept his word about the compliments. Every single day, whether he saw her in person or sent her a note with one of the ranch hands who came to town, he told her something he admired or appreciated or found beautiful about her. He told her she was intelligent when she debated with him about politics. He told her she was talented when she made a new recipe at the restaurant. He told her she was stunning when she wore her Sunday dress to church. He told her she was perfect exactly as she was when she worried that she was not educated enough or refined enough for him. Hannah slowly, carefully, began to believe him. She started to carry herself differently, with her shoulders back and her head high. She started to meet people's eyes instead of looking at the ground. She started to see herself through Dalton's eyes, and the reflection was so different from what she had always believed that it felt like becoming a new person. Or maybe it was just becoming herself for the first time. In October, when the aspens turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Dalton took Hannah out to the Red Creek Ranch to see the place where he worked. It was beautiful land, rolling hills covered in grass that had gone golden in the autumn sun, with mountains rising in the distance and the creek sparkling clear and cold. Dalton showed her the horses he trained, and the cattle they ran, and the little cabin he lived in with 2 other cowboys. "Someday I want my own place," Dalton told her as they stood looking out over the land. "Nothing huge, just enough for some cattle and horses. A good house with a porch, maybe a garden for vegetables, a place to build a life." "It sounds wonderful," Hannah said. Dalton turned to her, his expression serious. "Would you want that too, a life like that, I mean, with me?" Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Not yet," Dalton said with a small smile. "When I ask you properly, you will know it. But I need to know if that is something you might want. I will not push you toward a future you do not want." Hannah thought about it, really thought about it. A life with Dalton would mean hard work and long days. It would mean dealing with harsh winters and hot summers and all the unpredictability of ranching. But it would also mean waking up next to someone who loved her, who saw her, who thought she was beautiful. It would mean building something together, creating a home and maybe a family. It would mean being cherished. "Yes," Hannah said firmly, "that is exactly what I want." Dalton's smile was brighter than the sun. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Hannah kissed him back with all the hope and love and joy that was bubbling up inside her. A month later, on a cold November evening, Dalton took Hannah to dinner at the Copper Kettle after it had closed for the night. Mrs. Dalton had helped him arrange it, leaving them alone with a table set with candles and a meal that she had prepared before slipping out the back door. Hannah was confused at first, wondering why they were eating at the restaurant instead of going somewhere else. But then Dalton got down on one knee and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Hannah Zimmer, you walked into this restaurant 5 months ago carrying nothing but a flour sack and a whole lot of pain. Since then, you have changed my life in ways I cannot even put into words. You have made me happier than I knew I could be. You have made me want to be a better man. You have given me something to work toward and hope for." His voice was steady even though his hands were shaking slightly. "I know I cannot offer you luxury or an easy life. But I can offer you my whole heart and my promise that I will spend every day making sure you know how loved and valued and beautiful you are. Will you marry me?" Hannah was crying, but this time they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Dalton slipped the ring onto her finger. It was simple, a small gold band with a tiny diamond, but to Hannah it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He stood up and kissed her, and Mrs. Dalton burst back through the door clapping and crying and saying she had been listening at the window and could not help herself. They were married in December, a small ceremony at the church in Rock Springs with Mrs. Dalton and the ranch hands and a few friends from town in attendance. Hannah wore a new dress that she and Mrs. Dalton had sewn together, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs. Dalton wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Hannah's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar, when the preacher asked if Dalton took Hannah to be his wife. He said, "I do," with such conviction that it rang through the small church. When it was Hannah's turn, she said, "I do," with her voice clear and strong and full of certainty. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Dalton he could kiss his bride, Dalton cupped Hannah's face in his hands and said, "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," before kissing her while everyone cheered. They spent their wedding night in the small room behind the restaurant, since they could not afford to travel and Dalton had to be back at the ranch in the morning. But it did not matter. They were together, and that was all that mattered. Dalton was gentle and patient, and he told Hannah over and over how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, how lucky he was. Hannah believed every word. Married life was not easy, but it was good. Hannah kept working at the copper kettle while Dalton worked at the ranch, saving every penny they could toward buying their own land. On Sundays, they went to church together, and then spent the afternoon walking or reading or just talking. Dalton still complimented her every single day, and Hannah had stopped flinching or arguing. She had started to believe it, really believe it, down in her bones. In the spring, Hannah found out she was pregnant. She told Dalton on a Sunday afternoon as they sat by the creek, and he picked her up and spun her around whooping with joy before remembering to be careful and setting her down gently. "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy? I am over the moon. We are going to have a baby, our baby." Dalton put his hand on her still flat stomach. "You are going to be the most beautiful mother." "You cannot possibly know that," Hannah said, but she was smiling. "Yes, I can. Because you are beautiful and everything about you is beautiful, and our child is going to be lucky to have you." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah was sick in the mornings and tired all the time, and there were moments when she felt huge and ungainly and the opposite of beautiful. But Dalton never wavered. He told her she glowed. He told her she was radiant. He told her that watching her grow their child was the most amazing thing he had ever witnessed. He rubbed her feet when they ached and brought her cold cloths when she was hot and read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. In late October, nearly a year to the day after Dalton had shown her the Red Creek Ranch and asked about their future, Hannah went into labor. It was long and painful and terrifying, with Mrs. Dalton and the local midwife attending to her while Dalton paced outside the room. When it was finally over, and Hannah held their son in her arms, She wept from exhaustion and relief and overwhelming love. Dalton came in as soon as they would let him, and his eyes were red like he had been crying too. He looked at Hannah and the baby with such awe that it took her breath away. "You are incredible," he whispered. "You are the strongest, most beautiful person I have ever known." They named the baby Daniel after Dalton's father. He was healthy and loud and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same sage green as his father's. Hannah had been worried she would not know how to be a mother, but Dalton was there every step of the way, encouraging her and helping her and telling her she was doing wonderfully, even when she felt like she had no idea what she was doing. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. They saved and scrimped, and finally, when Daniel was 3 years old, they had enough money to buy a piece of land about 5 miles outside of Rock Springs. It was only 80 acres, but it had good grass and a water source and enough space to build the life they had been dreaming about. They built a small house together, with help from the ranch hands and friends from town, and moved in during the summer of 1886. Hannah cried when she walked into their home for the first time, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that this was theirs. They owned it. Nobody could take it away or tell her she was not good enough for it. She had a husband who loved her, a son who was healthy and happy, and a place to call her own. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I am thinking that I am happy," Hannah said. "Really, truly happy. You deserve it. You deserve all of this and more." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" Dalton asked with a smile. "I see the man who saved my life. Not by rescuing me from danger, but by teaching me to see myself differently. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You made me believe I was worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Dalton said, his voice rough with emotion. "I just helped you see what was already there." They built their ranch slowly, adding a few cattle the first year and some chickens for eggs. Dalton still worked at the Red Creek Ranch part-time to bring in steady money while they got established, and Hannah took in sewing and laundry from people in town. It was hard work, but they were doing it together, and that made all the difference. Daniel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. When he was 5, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1888, and they named her Margaret after Hannah's mother. She had Hannah's golden brown eyes and Dalton's easy smile, and Daniel was immediately smitten with his baby sister. "You are so beautiful," Dalton told Hannah as she nursed their daughter. "Both of you." "I know," Hannah said, and she meant it. She finally, truly believed it. Not because her face had changed, or because she looked any different than she had when she stumbled into Rock Springs 6 years earlier, but because she had learned to see herself through the eyes of someone who loved her, and that had changed everything. The ranch grew over the years. They added more cattle and bought a few horses that Dalton trained and sold. They expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. They saved enough money to buy the adjoining 80 acres, doubling their land. It was never going to be a huge operation, but it was enough. It was theirs. Hannah kept in touch with Mrs. Dalton, who had become like a mother to her. The older woman eventually sold the copper kettle and moved into a small house in town, where Hannah and the children visited her regularly. Daniel and Margaret grew up knowing that their mother had worked at the restaurant, and that it was where their parents had met and fallen in love. "Tell us the story again," Margaret would beg when she was 7 or 8, and Hannah would tell them about walking into Rock Springs with nothing but a flour sack and finding a job and meeting a cowboy who told her every day that she was beautiful until she finally believed him. "Did you really not think you were beautiful?" Daniel asked once, looking at his mother with confusion. "But you are." "I did not see it then," Hannah explained. "But your father helped me learn to see it. And now I want you both to know that you are beautiful too, inside and out. Do not ever let anyone tell you different." Dalton still complimented Hannah every single day. Even after years of marriage, even after seeing her at her worst, sick or tired or covered in dirt from working in the garden, he found something to praise. "Your hands are so capable. I love the way you laugh with the children. You look beautiful in the morning light. Your strength amazes me." And Hannah believed every word because she had learned that beauty was not about having perfect features or wearing fancy dresses. It was about being seen and valued and loved. It was about someone looking at you and appreciating not just what you looked like, but who you were. And Dalton had been doing that. From the very first day, he walked into the copper kettle and saw something in her that nobody else had bothered to look for. In 1895, when they had been married for 13 years, Rock Springs threw a celebration for the 4th of July. There was a picnic and games and dancing in the town square, and Hannah wore a new dress she had made from fabric Dalton had bought her. They danced together as the sun set, with Daniel now 12 years old and trying to teach Margaret to dance while she giggled and stepped on his toes. "You remember the first time I told you that you were beautiful?" Dalton asked as they swayed to the music. "Of course I do. I thought you were making fun of me. And now I know you were telling the truth, and I know that I am lucky to have someone who sees me the way you do." Dalton pulled her closer. "I am the lucky one. You took a chance on a cowboy who did not have much to offer except his word and his heart." "That was all I needed," Hannah said. "That is still all I need." As the years continued to pass, Hannah watched her children grow and thrive. Daniel became a skilled horseman like his father, tall and strong and kind. Margaret grew into a bright, confident girl who never doubted her own worth, because she had been raised by parents who told her every day how valued she was. They had the kind of childhood Hannah had never had, full of love and security and encouragement. The ranch prospered too. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough money to cover their needs and even a few wants. They added sheep to their operation, and Hannah learned to spin wool and make yarn that she sold in town. Dalton became known as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, and people came from miles around to buy animals he had worked with. In 1900, when the new century dawned bright and full of promise, Hannah stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the land. She was 40 years old now, with threads of silver in her brown hair and lines on her face from years of squinting into the sun. She was not the frightened, bruised girl who had walked into Rock Springs 18 years earlier, carrying everything she owned in a flour sack and believing she was worthless. Dalton came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How different my life is from what I thought it would be. How lucky I am. We are both lucky. We found each other." Hannah turned to face him. His dark hair was touched with gray now too, and there were lines around his eyes from years of smiling. But he was still the same man who had walked into the copper kettle and seen something in her that nobody else had bothered to look for. He was still the man who had told her every day that she was beautiful until she believed him. "I love you," Hannah said, "more than I could ever put into words." "I love you too, my beautiful wife," Hannah smiled. "I know." They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903 with a small party at the house. Mrs. Dalton came, now in her 70s but still sharp and full of stories. The ranch hands from Red Creek came, including Samuel, who was retired now but still visited the area regularly. Their children were there, Daniel now 20, and courting a girl from town, Margaret 15, and already showing signs of the strong, independent woman she would become. After everyone had left and the children had gone to bed, Hannah and Dalton sat on the porch together watching the stars. The night was clear and cool, and Hannah leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling peaceful and content. "Do you remember what you said to me that day when I finally agreed to let you court me?" Dalton asked. "I said a lot of things. You said you were starting to believe you were beautiful, that when I said it, you were starting to believe it." Hannah nodded. "I remember. Do you believe it now?" Hannah thought about the question seriously. She thought about the girl she had been, who had walked into town broken and afraid, who had believed that her stepfather's cruel words were the truth. She thought about the woman she had become, who had built a life and a family and a home. She thought about the way Dalton had looked at her every single day for more than 20 years, with love and admiration and appreciation. "Yes," Hannah said, "I believe it, not just because you tell me, although that helps, but because I have learned to see myself the way you see me. I have learned that beauty is not about perfect features or smooth skin or being young. It is about being loved and loving in return. It is about the life you build and the people you cherish. It is about seeing the good in yourself and others." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "You are the wisest person I know. And you are still the most persistent. 20 years of compliments, that is dedication. I plan on at least 20 more, maybe 50 if we are lucky," Hannah laughed. "I will hold you to that." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of the horses whinnied in response. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the smell of sage and dust and home. As the years marched on, their lives continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Daniel married his sweetheart in 1904, a kind girl named Elizabeth who fit into the family like she had always been there. They built a small house on the far side of the property and started their own herd, with Daniel working alongside his father to expand the ranch operation. Margaret decided she wanted to be a teacher and went to the normal school in Cheyenne, coming home for holidays with stories about her studies and her dreams of opening a school in Rock Springs. Hannah and Dalton became grandparents in 1905 when Daniel and Elizabeth had a daughter. Then came a son 2 years later and another daughter after that. The house was full of noise and laughter and chaos, with children running everywhere and Hannah teaching her grandchildren the same lessons she had taught her own children. You are loved. You are valued. You are beautiful, inside and out. Dalton still told Hannah she was beautiful every single day, even as they both grew older and grayer. Even when her hands became gnarled with arthritis from years of hard work. Even when his back started to ache and he moved slower than he used to. They had built something that would last, not just the ranch but the love they shared and the family they had created. In 1908, Margaret came home with news that she had been offered a teaching position in Rock Springs. She would be opening a small school for the children of miners and ranch families, and she was bursting with excitement about the opportunity. Hannah helped her daughter find a small house to rent in town and watched with pride as Margaret threw herself into her new career with the same determination and intelligence she had shown her whole life. Mrs. Dalton passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1910, and Hannah grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when nobody else would. They buried her in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Rock Springs, and Hannah made sure there were fresh flowers on her grave every week. She told her grandchildren stories about the woman who had run the copper kettle, who had been fair and kind, and who had helped their grandmother survive when she had nowhere else to go. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Daniel took over more of the day-to-day operations as Dalton's back and knees started to give him trouble. But Dalton still worked every day, just at a slower pace. He trained horses in the morning when it was cool and rested in the afternoon, and he still made sure to tell Hannah she was beautiful at least once a day, usually more. Hannah's hair turned completely silver, and the lines on her face deepened into permanent creases. She could no longer work as hard as she once had, but she kept the garden going and helped with the grandchildren and made sure the house was a warm, welcoming place for the ever-expanding family. She had become the kind of matriarch she had never known growing up, someone who held the family together with love and strength and wisdom. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Hannah and Dalton took a trip into town together, something they did less frequently now that they were older. They walked down the main street, holding hands like they were a young courting couple instead of a pair of people in their 50s who had been married for 3 decades. They passed the Copper Kettle, which was now a dry goods store, and Hannah felt a wave of nostalgia for the place where she had found both work and love. "You ever wish things had been different?" Dalton asked as they sat on a bench in the town square. "Different how?" "Easier. If you had not gone through everything you went through before you came here, if you had grown up knowing you were beautiful and valued." Hannah considered the question carefully. "I would not wish that pain on anyone. But I also do not know if I would appreciate what I have now if I had not experienced what I did. Everything I went through taught me to recognize love when I found it. It taught me to fight for what I wanted. It taught me that I was stronger than I thought." "You are the strongest person I know," Dalton said. "You always have been. I learned that from you. You saw strength in me before I saw it in myself." They sat together until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Then they walked home together, their steps slow but steady, their hands still linked after 30 years of marriage. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends to age and illness. They watched their grandchildren grow and their children become middle-aged. They saw the world change around them, with automobiles starting to appear on the roads and electricity coming to some of the bigger towns. But the ranch remained a constant, a place of tradition and hard work and family. Hannah and Dalton grew old together, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. Dalton still told Hannah every day that she was beautiful, even when they were both in their 60s and their bodies were worn from years of labor. Hannah still believed him because she had learned that beauty was not about youth or perfection. It was about being seen and loved for exactly who you were. In the spring of 1920, when they had been married for 37 years, Dalton fell ill with pneumonia. It came on suddenly, turning from a simple cold to something serious in a matter of days. Hannah nursed him around the clock, with help from their children and the doctor from town, but they all knew it was serious. Dalton was 62 years old and had worked hard his entire life, and his body was tired. On a sunny afternoon with the windows open to let in the spring breeze, Dalton called Hannah to his bedside. His breathing was labored and his face was pale, but his eyes were still the same sage green she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice weak. "Save your strength," Hannah said, holding his hand. "No, I need to say this." He looked at her with such love that it made her heart ache. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have made my life richer and fuller than I ever dreamed it could be. Loving you has been my greatest privilege and my greatest joy." Hannah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Do not talk like this is goodbye, just in case." Dalton squeezed her hand. "I need you to know, I need you to remember, you are beautiful, you are strong, you are everything." "I love you," Hannah whispered. I love you so much." "I love you too. Always." Dalton closed his eyes then, and though he held on for another day, he never regained consciousness. He passed away peacefully with Hannah holding his hand and their children gathered around, and Hannah felt like part of her soul had been torn away. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the county to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved. Hannah stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren around her, and she thought about the life they had built together. 37 years of marriage, a ranch that was thriving, children and grandchildren who were strong and capable and kind, a legacy of love. The days after Dalton's death were the hardest of Hannah's life. She had lost her mother and been cast out by her stepfather and experienced hunger and fear and pain, but nothing compared to the grief of losing her husband. The man who had seen her when nobody else would. The man who had told her every day that she was beautiful until she believed him. The man who had loved her completely and unconditionally. But Hannah was strong, stronger than she had been at 22 when she walked into Rock Springs with nothing but a flour sack and a bruised face. She had learned that strength from Dalton, had learned to see it in herself because he had seen it first. So she grieved, but she also kept going. She still worked in her garden. She still spent time with her grandchildren. She still visited Margaret in town and helped Daniel and Elizabeth with the ranch operations. And every morning when she looked in the mirror, she heard Dalton's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "You are beautiful. I know," she would say out loud to the empty room. "I finally know." Hannah lived for another 15 years after Dalton's death, watching her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. She became a great-grandmother, holding tiny babies and telling them stories about the ranch and their great-grandfather who had trained horses and seen beauty in a broken woman. She watched the world change even more, with radio and telephones and even moving pictures, but the ranch remained a constant, a connection to the past and the life she and Dalton had built together. On a warm evening in July of 1935, 53 years after she had walked into Rock Springs for the first time, Hannah sat on the porch of the house she and Dalton had built and looked out over the land. She was 75 years old now, her body frail and her steps uncertain, but her mind was still sharp and full of memories. Daniel came out to sit with her, his own hair now gray and his face weathered from decades of working outdoors. "Are you comfortable, Mother? Do you need anything?" "I am fine," Hannah said, "just enjoying the evening." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Then Hannah spoke again, her voice soft with memory. "Did I ever tell you about the first time your father told me I was beautiful?" Daniel smiled. "Many times, but I never get tired of hearing it." So Hannah told the story again, about being young and afraid and believing she was worthless, about a cowboy with sage green eyes who saw something in her that nobody else had bothered to look for. She told him about the daily compliments that had worn down her defenses and built up her confidence. She told him about learning to believe that she was beautiful, inside and out, because someone loved her enough to show her the truth. "He changed my life," Hannah said when the story was done. "Not by rescuing me, but by teaching me to see myself differently. That was his gift to me, and it is the gift I have tried to give to all of you, to see the beauty and strength in yourselves and others." "You did give us that," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day of our lives." Hannah smiled. "Good. That is what matters." She passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, surrounded by family and love to the very end. They buried her next to Dalton on the hill, overlooking the ranch they had built together. And the entire county came to the funeral to honor a woman who had started with nothing and created something lasting and beautiful. The ranch continued on through the generations, with Daniel's children taking it over and then their children after that. And the story of Hannah and Dalton became part of the family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The story of a woman who had never been told she was beautiful, and the cowboy who said it every day until she believed him. The story of how love could heal old wounds, and how being truly seen could change everything. The story of a legacy built not just on land and cattle, but on the foundation of two people who had chosen each other and built a life of meaning and purpose together. And in the end, that was the truest beauty of all.